What tangible physical form did the historic city of Rotterdam once inhabit? We can only imagine it. For in 1940, within the span of a single devastating day, aerial bombardment obliterated virtually its entire ancient core, reducing centuries of accumulated history to mere dust and rubble. The great metropolis suddenly ceased to exist, swallowed by ash and fire. The modern Rotterdam that defines itself today, a skyline of glass, sharp concrete, and daring architectural geometry, is fundamentally a phoenix city, raised almost entirely anew, ascending directly from the site of its own profound devastation. Yet, before this terrible catastrophe, the city was an entirely different entity. Its strength was not derived from the opulent display of grand palaces or the formality of elaborate state rituals, but from its formidable operational efficiency, its unwavering dedication to pragmatic labor, and the ceaseless, driving rhythm of maritime commerce. Rotterdam flourished brilliantly throughout the Dutch Golden Age, a prosperity that was inextricably linked to a profound, symbiotic relationship with the River Meuse. The river was much more than a simple navigable access point. It served as a vital, critical corridor for the flow of merchandise, the migration of people, and the conveyance of essential information, a genuine lifeline that extended from the North Sea deep into the heart of the European continent. It was the presence of the water that fundamentally dictated where the earliest settlements could take hold, and the constant necessity of water management that forced the city to master the crucial arts of hydraulic control and sheer urban survival. Far from ignoring the river, Rotterdam embraced it. The city deliberately positioned its docks, its indispensable public works, and its defensive structures right along the river's edge, creating an urban tapestry that seemed entirely woven around the relentless, shifting pattern of the tides. One of the earliest and most crucial control points was the Oude Hoofd, variously translated as the Old Head or Old Wharf, situated directly on the bank of the Meuse. This location was anything but tranquil. It served as a tense, vigilant administrative threshold where the imperatives of defense and the mechanics of commerce seamlessly overlapped. Incoming vessels were mandatorily obliged to slacken their speed. Sailors lowered their sails deliberately. Anchor ropes were made ready, and the shouted commands of the crew echoed sharply across the water. From the shore, vigilant officials meticulously scrutinized the mariners, thoroughly inspected the contents of the cargo, verified supporting documentation, and cross-referenced trade manifestos. To pass the Oude Hoofd was to abandon the free, open expanse of the river territory and submit to the tightly regulated urban jurisdiction. For the approaching sailors, it represented a palpable, immediate moment of transition. For the city dwellers, it was the physical point where vital information, commodity prices, shifts in the market, and international political rumors arrived reliably with the tide, delivered right alongside the heavy crates of valuable merchandise. As Rotterdam expanded its influence, the limitations inherent in maintaining only a single checkpoint rapidly became obvious. Vessels increased in size, cargo weights grew heavier, and the density of maritime traffic surged, rendering the unified management of both trade supervision and military defense from one location an unsustainable burden. Consequently, the city strategically extended its sphere of control to the Nieuwe Hoofd, the new head, situated further downriver. If the Oude Hoofd functioned as the original entry lock, the Nieuwe Hoofd represented its vital, strategic expansion, effectively transforming the riverfront threshold into a substantial zone of control, monitored across a considerably longer trajectory. Taken collectively, these two critical points perfectly illustrate Rotterdam's elevation from a modest riverside settlement into an ambitious, dominant port city, one where all future prosperity depended entirely upon its comprehensive ability to master the various flows. The relentless flow of water, the profitable flow of goods, and the overarching flow of commercial power. While trade undeniably constituted the economic lifeblood of the city, Rotterdam's defining characteristic was the pervasive way commerce permeated and shaped its entire urban structure. Situated immediately adjacent to the commercial heart stood De Beurs, the trade exchange, a dedicated space where merchants gathered for activities extending far beyond the simple transaction of physical, tangible goods. Within its halls, they vigorously debated complex shipping schedules, negotiated forward prices, arranged essential marine insurance policies, and formally concluded legal contracts. Crucially, Intelligence traveled here far faster than the cargo itself, allowing the influential merchant class to react swiftly, not only to local shifts in supply and demand, but also to emerging political instabilities in distant global markets. Though perhaps more modest in architectural scale, when compared to the famously grand exchange in Amsterdam, de Beers was nevertheless an indispensable nexus, tethering Rotterdam firmly to vital regional and international market networks. Just a short distance from the exchange lay the De Wismar, the fish market, which functioned as a rapid, urgent pulse point for daily civic life. Fish caught both in the River Meuse and the volatile North Sea was unloaded at dawn and put up for immediate sale upon arrival at the dockside. Freshness was the absolute determinant of value. Prices were volatile, often changing minute by minute, and the insistent shouts of the vendors, the sharp haggling, and the clanging sounds of the weighing scales reverberated constantly in the damp, salty air. Any form of delay meant instant financial loss. The De Wismar's role extended beyond merely supplying the city with food. It sustained a vast, intricate ecosystem of livelihoods, supporting fishermen, strenuous porters, busy wholesale traders, and countless small vendors, all individuals whose existence was fundamentally governed by the unforgiving rhythm of the tides and the unpredictable fortunes of the sea. Penetrating deeper into the urban core, the Groot marked the great market unfurled, serving as the city's primary social stage. This substantial square was more than a mere location for commercial transactions. It acted as the central meeting point where news and circulating rumors spread with impressive speed, and where official public announcements were broadcast effectively amidst the ceaseless, bustling crowds. A significant intellectual marker was established in 1622 when a statue of Erasmus was erected on the square's east side. Erasmus, the era's most celebrated humanist, became emblematic of Rotterdam's particular intellectual identity, a thriving commercial city deeply committed to industry and pragmatic labor, yet one which profoundly valued itself as a culturally aware community, upholding the tenets of education, civic ethics, and penetrating critical thought. Stretching further east along the riverbank was the Boomjes, a highly prestigious, tree-lined waterfront avenue where the grand mansions of the city's wealthiest merchants stood in intriguing juxtaposition with vast warehouses and key operational hubs. This was the location of the Dutch East India Company, VOC building, which functioned simultaneously as the administrative offices and the primary storage depot for the Rotterdam Chamber. This site served as the central nerve point for coordinating ambitious oceanic voyages and acted as the essential conduit through which lucrative goods from Asia entered the city's vast trading network. The palpable, direct link between the high-level VOC headquarters and the adjacent shipbuilding and outfitting yards clearly demonstrated how Rotterdam operated as a unified, tightly integrated organism. Strategic commercial decisions were intrinsically tied to practical technical know-how, to the tireless work of the shipwrights, and to the material resources, the ropes, timber, nails, and pitch that physically transformed vast global ambitions into tangible, seafaring reality. Nonetheless, Rotterdam's success did not subsist on commerce in isolation. Its quiet authority was enforced effectively through a lean, powerful, administrative apparatus, a form of municipal power that did not require ostentatious architectural display. The Stadhuis City Hall was the central hub, the location where municipal taxes were meticulously collected, where city laws were enacted, where commercial disputes were settled, and where public order was rigorously maintained. Close by, Het Schielenhuis housed the crucial headquarters for the Water Management Authority, a foundational institution in this perpetually low-lying landscape. From this office, the complex maintenance of dikes, canals, and intricate drainage systems was coordinated to constantly avert catastrophic flooding. In the context of Rotterdam, controlling the water was literally synonymous with controlling existence itself. Finally, near the river was the Naval Admiralty headquarters, charged with organizing maritime protection, enforcing sea law, and ensuring that vital shipping lanes remained safe and secure, guaranteeing that trade was never choked by disorder, the threat of piracy, or armed conflict. These institutions, taken together, constituted the city's essential administrative backbone, legal, hydraulic, and maritime, the crucial, often invisible, systems necessary for the sustained functioning of the entire metropolis. Rotterdam's enduring prosperity was also deeply reliant upon its capacity for vigilant self-defense. The Dolen, the militia headquarters, was the designated space where citizen soldiers regularly gathered and trained. These defenders were not distant professional troops, but local merchants, skilled artisans, and ordinary city residents, individuals who personally shouldered the formidable responsibility of protecting their own community. Defense, therefore, became an internalized civic duty, intrinsic to the very Rotterdam identity. Physically towering above the entire skyline was the Lorenskirk, the church that visually dominated the city landscape. As the principal Protestant church, it functioned both as an essential place of worship and as an unmistakable civic beacon, clearly visible from the River Meuse and from nearly every street corner. Tellingly, the Lorenskirk stands out as one of the extremely few physical witnesses that survived the 1940 bombing. Though heavily damaged, it was meticulously restored and remains today a powerful material anchor, successfully retaining the memory of the past for all succeeding generations. And then, the entire physical reality of the historic Rotterdam was wiped clean. It is a profound and moving concept to consider that a great city can lose almost its entire material body in the space of 24 hours, yet manage to preserve its intrinsic identity, its soul. Rotterdam consciously chose the path of reconstruction, embracing the historical rupture and building afresh, thereby asserting that communal memory is held not merely within ancient walls, but more crucially in how its inhabitants choose to remember and apply the lessons learned. The compelling story of Rotterdam stands as a reminder that the true, enduring strength of any metropolis does not emanate from superficial glamour or outward displays of wealth, but from its silent, deep foundations. A reliable judicial structure, effective hydraulic governance, disciplined commerce, and a robust community spirit willing to shoulder heavy civic responsibility. Furthermore, it serves as a stark warning regarding the fragility of collective memory. If we neglect to diligently record, restore, or vividly recount this history using the sophisticated tools available in our own age, those former physical faces of the city risk vanishing permanently, not due to any absence of historical existence, but simply because no one remains sufficiently patient or dedicated enough to fully recall them. Therefore, when we observe the reconstructed Rotterdam of the present day, we are obligated to look far deeper than the shimmering layers of glass and concrete. We must forcefully recall that beneath this modern foundation once lay a vibrant city, shaped entirely by water, defined by relentless labor, and animated by a perpetual flow of commerce and ideas. The very act of committing to investigate, to restore, and to fully comprehend that vanished past constitutes a powerful form of historical preservation, not undertaken for the sake of mere sentimentality or nostalgia, but as an essential practice to learn how best to construct a future that is structurally more responsible, socially more humane, and fundamentally more resilient in the face of inevitable, unpredictable upheavals.